There are towns in Japan where the seawall is taller than a 4-story building. You cannot see the ocean from the street. You cannot hear the waves. You cannot even tell the water is there. Japan spent 40 years and billions of dollars building a concrete barrier stretching nearly 400 kilometers along its coastline. The longest seawall ever constructed in human history. And when it was finished, the people who lived behind it said they felt nothing. Not safe. Not relieved. Just cut off. That contradiction is the whole story. And by the end of this, you will understand why a country built something this massive, why it may not work the way anyone hoped, and why the most important decision Japan ever made about survival had nothing to do with concrete at all. To understand what Japan was trying to protect against, you need to go back to March 11, 2011. At 2:46 in the afternoon, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the northeastern coast. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan. The ground shook for 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Most earthquakes last seconds. This one lasted long enough for people to film it, post it, and still not believe it was real. Then the water came. The tsunami that followed traveled at the speed of a commercial aircraft across the open ocean. By the time it reached the shore, the waves were over 15 meters high in some places. Taller than a 5-story apartment block. They traveled 6 kilometers inland. They moved faster than a person could run. Nearly 20,000 people died. Entire towns were erased in under an hour. Japan had seawalls before 2011. Most cities along the northeastern coast had them. The problem was that the tsunami that hit that day was bigger than anything those walls were designed to stop. In some places, the water simply went over. In others, it went around. The walls held the water back just long enough to give people a false sense of safety, which may have cost more lives than if there had been no walls at all. So what do you do after something like that? Japan did what Japan does. It planned. Systematically. Methodically. And at an almost incomprehensible scale. The government committed to rebuilding the entire coastline with new, higher, more advanced seawalls. Not just reinforcing what existed. Starting over. The project covered 440 kilometers of coastline. The walls would range in height from 4 to 15 meters depending on location. Some sections would be reinforced with steel. Others would be embedded into the hillside itself to prevent flanking. The total cost would eventually exceed $12 billion. Construction began almost immediately after the disaster. Thousands of workers. Millions of tons of concrete. Some sections took years to complete. Others are still being finished today. Here is what makes this more complicated than it sounds. The people who were supposed to benefit from this wall were not always asked if they wanted it. In the town of Fudai, a seawall built in the 1970s by a stubborn, visionary mayor was credited with saving every single resident during the 2011 tsunami. That wall was 30 meters tall, and when it was proposed decades earlier, the townspeople fought against it. They thought it was too expensive, too dramatic, too much. The mayor built it anyway. He reportedly said he had seen what a tsunami could do, and he would not let it happen to his people again. That story is remarkable. But it is also the exception. In most of the towns rebuilt after 2011, communities were split. Some residents wanted the walls as high as possible. Others felt the walls were a kind of defeat. They said the ocean was not just a threat. It was their livelihood, their identity, their view. Fishing communities that had existed for centuries suddenly found themselves staring at a grey concrete wall where the horizon used to be. Property values dropped. Tourism collapsed. Young people left. One elderly fisherman told a journalist that he had lived by the sea his entire life. He knew the rhythms of the water, the sounds it made before a storm, the way the light changed before bad weather. Now he could not see it. He said he felt like he was already dead. That is not a small thing. That is an entire relationship with a place, severed by infrastructure. And then there is the engineering question that no one wants to say out loud. What if the next one is bigger? The 2011 earthquake was the strongest ever recorded in Japan. But seismologists have evidence of earthquakes in the region that were significantly more powerful centuries ago. The walls being built today are designed to withstand a tsunami of similar magnitude to 2011. They are not designed for something worse. And in geological time, something worse is not a question of if. It is a question of when. Japan knows this. The government knows this. The walls were never meant to be the only solution. They were always intended to buy time. Seconds, maybe minutes, for people to reach higher ground. The walls are not a guarantee of survival. They are a delay mechanism. And that distinction matters enormously, because a wall that people believe will save them might actually stop them from running. This is the part of the story that keeps disaster researchers up at night. In Japan, there is a concept called tsunami tendenko. It roughly translates to every person for themselves when the tsunami comes. It is not a selfish idea. It is a survival strategy. It means that in the moments after an earthquake, you do not wait for family, you do not go back for possessions, you do not look to see if the warning is real. You run to high ground immediately, without hesitation, without looking back. The understanding is that if everyone follows this rule, everyone survives. If you stop to help one person, you may both die. The communities that survived 2011 with the lowest casualty rates were the ones that had practiced this. The ones that ran without thinking. The ones where the children had been drilled since elementary school to treat any strong earthquake as a tsunami warning and move to high ground immediately. No seawall taught them that. Their culture did. Japan built the biggest coastal defense structure in human history. It is genuinely impressive. It represents the full force of what a wealthy, organized, technologically advanced nation can do when it decides to protect its people. And it may not be enough. Because the ocean does not negotiate. It does not read blueprints. It does not care about engineering specifications or budget allocations or international records. The ocean just does what the ocean does. The real lesson Japan is still learning, the one that was always there beneath the concrete and the planning and the grief, is that surviving the next disaster is not primarily a question of what you build. It is a question of what you remember. Whether the stories of what water can do stay alive in a community long enough to make the next generation run when the ground starts to shake. The towns behind those walls are quieter now. Some are thriving. Some are emptying out. The walls stand. And somewhere along that 400 kilometers of grey concrete, an old fisherman sits facing a direction that no longer looks like anything he recognizes. He knows the water is still there. He just cannot see it anymore. And that, in a strange way, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Because memory fades. It always does. The generation that watched the 2011 wave take everything they knew, those people will not live forever. Their children remember it secondhand. Their grandchildren will read about it in textbooks, if the textbooks even cover it properly. And once the living memory is gone, what remains is a wall. A big, expensive, reassuring wall that says, "Do not worry, we handled it, you are safe here." That is exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed. There is a word researchers use for this: hazard complacency. It is what happens when protection becomes so visible and so permanent that people stop preparing for the thing it was built to stop. You see it everywhere. Cities built on flood plains because the levees held for 50 years. Towns that stopped earthquake drills because the new buildings are supposed to be stronger. Communities that let the evacuation routes get overgrown because nothing bad had happened in a while. The wall does not just protect people. Over time, it quietly tells them they do not need to protect themselves. Japan is aware of this. Some municipalities have started embedding tsunami stone markers into the new infrastructure, continuing a tradition that goes back centuries. Ancient stones carved with warnings, placed at the high water marks of historical disasters, telling future generations exactly how far the water once reached. Some of those stones were ignored before 2011. Villages had been built below them for decades. But the villages above the stones survived. That is the tension Japan is still sitting inside. Between engineering and memory. Between concrete and culture. Between the wall that says you are safe and the stone that says remember what water can do. Neither one is enough on its own. Both matter. And the country that understands that better than almost anyone on earth is still figuring out how to hold both truths at the same time. The wall is real. The threat is real. And somewhere out in the Pacific, the ocean is doing what it has always done, moving, building, waiting for no one.